That afternoon turned into a nightmare. The insults, the prejudiced questions, and then a nasty offer to get it over with. When she refused to be subdued, refused to compromise with corruption, what she got in return was not justice, but the cold metal sound of handcuffs tightening around her wrists, right in front of the curious eyes of passers-by. Humiliation, treatment like a criminal. But the policeman did not know that the woman he had just handcuffed was not ordinary. And on her wrist, in addition to the cruel handcuffs, there was something else. A small device that was about to call forth a storm of justice that he could never have imagined. Who really holds the power here? And what is the price to pay for arrogance and racism? Let's listen to this shocking story. The late afternoon sun, weak and amber, struggled to penetrate the glass and steel skyscrapers of downtown, but was quickly swallowed by the lengthening shadows. The rush hour still held its chaos on Washington Avenue. The slow-moving traffic, the uneven growls of engines, and the constant hum of crowds pouring out of office buildings, rushing to join the sidewalks or to reach the bars and restaurants that had already begun to light up. It was the familiar, noisy cacophony of the city at the end of the workday. Sitting behind the wheel of her sleek black Lexus LS, Eleanor Vance felt the gentle hum of the waiting engine. She scanned the traffic ahead, then glanced at the smartwatch on her left wrist. 5:35. The big meeting at the Metropolitan Police Department was scheduled to start at 6. She didn't want to be late, especially today, when the agenda focused on police reform initiatives, a topic she had invested so much energy and political capital into. In her mind, the main talking points for increased officer accountability, mandatory anti-bias training, and appropriate funding for community outreach were coming together. Eleanor is in her late 40s or early 50s, but her appearance exudes the sharpness and energy of someone much younger. Her tan skin is smooth, her dark brown eyes intelligent and determined. She wears a perfectly tailored business suit that accentuates her well-proportioned figure. A simple yet elegant pearl necklace peeks out from her collarbone, and a modern smartwatch is the only technological touch to her elegant outfit. Even sitting in the middle of a crowded traffic jam, Eleanor carries herself with an air of confidence, innate power, but controlled by a remarkable composure. She is the embodiment of success, a role model to many, but also a target of scrutiny and prejudice in a society that still has many hidden cracks. She signaled, smoothly shifting the Lexus into the right lane, preparing to turn onto the road leading to the police station at the next intersection, just a few blocks away. Everything was smooth, precise, as was her usual careful driving. Suddenly, a flash of red and blue light flashed in her rearview mirror. A short, urgent siren sounded behind her. A city police department patrol car followed her ominously. Eleanor frowned, a flicker of surprise and confusion crossing her face. She was certain she hadn't been speeding, changing lanes, or breaking any laws. Was it a random check? Or had there been some mistake? She glanced at her watch. 5:37. This was an untimely delay. With the professional composure honed over years of political activity, Eleanor found a space on the side of the road between a parked pickup truck and a fire hydrant. She steered carefully, pulling over, trying not to obstruct the slow-moving traffic behind her. She applied the handbrake, turned off the engine, and with a slight whir, the driver's side window rolled down. Following her custom and the advice she often gave to her constituents when dealing with the police, Eleanor placed both hands on the wheel, within easy reach, and waited. The patrol car stopped right behind her, the roof lights still flashing frantically, attracting the attention of a few pedestrians on the sidewalk. The driver's side door opened. A police officer stepped out. He was about 40 years old, white, stocky, but slightly overweight, wearing a dark blue uniform that seemed a little too tight. His face was red, his features rough, his eyes blue behind dark aviator sunglasses, even though the sun was almost out. He puffed out his chest, walked deliberately slowly, around the back of the patrol car and toward Eleanor's Lexus, exuding an air of smugness and excessive authority. He seemed unconcerned with the traffic that was having to squeeze past his patrol car, which was taking up part of the lane. He stopped by Eleanor's rolled-down window, leaning down just enough to get a good look at the woman inside. Instead of a polite greeting, he tapped twice on the glass with his gloved knuckles, a gesture that was both unnecessary and somewhat patronizing. "Do you know why you were stopped?" His voice was patronizing, slightly harsh, carrying the unpleasant accent of the suburbs where he grew up, a stark contrast to the downtown setting. Eleanor looked straight into the officer's dark sunglasses, trying to keep her voice completely calm and professional, not betraying any signs of annoyance or concern. "Hello, officer," she replied clearly. "I'm not really sure. I'm on my way to a scheduled meeting at the police department." She emphasized the destination, a subtle way of communicating that she was not a stranger or a pushover, that she had a valid reason to be in the area and that it was urgent. The officer, Robert Bob Miller, his name tag on his uniform, smirked behind his sunglasses. "The police department?" he repeated, his tone skeptical. "You? What are you doing there?" His eyes traveled from Eleanor's face down to her expensive business suit, lingering on her pearl necklace, then over the luxurious leather interior of the Lexus. The black woman's wealth and self-assurance seemed to make him uncomfortable, as if she were in a place she didn't belong, driving a car she didn't deserve. "Car registration and license," he ordered, his voice losing its pretense, replaced by suspicion and a hint of undisguised mockery. Eleanor let out a soft breath, trying to suppress the rising frustration. She reached into the glove compartment and pulled out her black leather wallet and neatly clipped car papers. She calmly pulled out her license and registration, handing them to Miller through the window. She could feel his eyes on her every move, as if she were a criminal trying to hide something. Miller took the papers without a word of thanks. He flipped through them slowly, deliberately, as if trying to stall for time, glancing at Eleanor through his dark glasses. There was a few seconds of silence, broken only by the noise of the street. Then he began to ask questions that had nothing to do with examining the papers, but were intended to probe, to belittle, and to demonstrate his power in a crude way. "What the hell are you doing driving a car like that?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Win the lottery?" The question clearly implied that a black woman like her could not have earned enough money honestly to afford such a luxury vehicle. Eleanor clenched her hands on the wheel. "I work hard, officer," she replied, trying to keep her voice even. Miller let out a short, dry chuckle. "Oh, hard work?" He glanced at her suit again. "That looks expensive. It must have been a gift from someone generous." The words were brazen and insulting, implying that she had earned these things not through her own ability, but through some indecent means. Eleanor's patience was being severely tested. She felt the blood begin to rush to her face, but she knew she had to keep her cool. Any angry reaction could be misinterpreted and make the situation worse. "Officer," she said, her voice taking on a cold, steely edge, "my clothing and my means of transportation have nothing to do with why you stopped me. What violation have I committed?" Miller seemed to enjoy the discomfort he was causing. He continued his prejudiced questioning. "Honestly, are you here to bail out a boyfriend or a relative, or are you being cited for something?" He was deliberately putting her down, pushing her into the negative stereotype he had created in his head of abnormally wealthy black people. "I told you," Eleanor replied, her voice now unmistakably irritated but still controlled. "I have an official meeting at the police department. Now, would you please tell me the official reason for my stop so I can get to work on time?" But Miller seemed unfazed, or perhaps he didn't believe her. Eleanor's calm but firm demeanor, her daring to question him, and her emanating confidence only seemed to infuriate him. He felt his authority challenged by someone he considered inferior. He decided to teach her a lesson. He ignored Eleanor's question, looked straight at her, and made up an excuse. "You changed lanes suddenly, didn't look, and almost caused an accident with the car behind you." His voice was firm, as if it were an undeniable fact. Eleanor froze. It was a blatant lie. She knew she had driven extremely carefully, looked carefully before changing lanes, and that no cars had been harmed by her actions. "Officer, that's not true," she protested, her voice firm. "I signaled and looked carefully." "Oh, you dare say I'm lying?" Miller growled, taking a step closer. "You're antagonizing the police." He looked around, seeing that a few more passers-by were stopping to watch. That seemed to excite him even more. He lowered his voice a little, feigning friendliness. But it was sinister. "Well, this is a serious offense," he said, his tone almost condescending. "At least 30 days of license suspension, a hefty fine, possibly a court appearance. It'll definitely make you miss that important meeting with someone, right?" He paused, his eyes behind his dark glasses flicking to the smartwatch on Eleanor's wrist and the pearl necklace. "Unless—" He trailed off, tilting his head meaningfully. "You know, a busy person like you probably don't want to waste your precious time on this kind of paperwork, right? We can settle everything right here nice and quick. No paperwork, no hassle." The blackmail was obvious. He was using her position, her skin color and gender, her car and her clothes to force her to pay a bribe. A feeling of disgust and anger rose in Eleanor's chest. This was what she was fighting to eliminate from the police force. She looked straight into Miller's sunglasses, her face fearless, her voice cold as ice, cutting through all his illusions. "Officer Miller, I will never tolerate corruption or abuse of power. If you think I violated traffic laws, write me a ticket. I will handle this matter according to the law." The blunt rejection, without a hint of hesitation or reserve, was like a slap in the face to Miller. He had not expected this woman to be so adamant. His confusion quickly turned to uncontrollable anger. He felt humiliated, belittled in public. His small authority was being blatantly challenged. "Oh, you're so bold!" he roared, his red face now showing a fierce expression. "Who do you think you are, talking to me like that? This is clearly an act of defiance against a law enforcement officer. Get out of the car! Now!" He placed his hand on the butt of the Glock pistol at his side, a clear, threatening gesture. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. The situation was escalating dangerously. She knew that resistance was futile and could lead to dire consequences. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her hands from shaking, and unlocked the car door. The soft click was harsh against the noise of the street. She slowly pushed the door open, stood straight on the sidewalk, and faced the seething officer. She was almost his height, but her composure was a stark contrast to Miller's scowl. A few curious passers-by had stopped, keeping a safe distance but clearly watching the proceedings. Cell phones were discreetly raised. Miller said nothing more. He stepped forward, quickly closing in on Eleanor. Instead of twisting her arms behind her back as he usually did, he commanded roughly, "Put your arms out in front of you." Eleanor was momentarily stunned by the strange request, but she complied, holding her hands out in front of her, palms facing each other. Miller immediately pulled a pair of shiny metal handcuffs from the leather sheath at his waist. With a forceful snap, he snapped the two cold metal rings onto her wrists. There was a dry snap. The handcuffs tightened, not painfully, but enough to cause extreme discomfort and humiliation. "You are under arrest for resisting arrest and failure to comply with orders," Miller declared loudly, his voice full of glee, as if he wanted everyone on Washington Avenue to hear his victory. Eleanor felt a wave of humiliation, anger, and a little fear. She was handcuffed like a street criminal, right in the middle of the city, on her way to the very police station where she had ultimate authority. Her hands were locked in front of her, a symbol of temporary helplessness, a public humiliation. She gritted her teeth, trying to hold back the tears of frustration. She knew she couldn't afford to break down. She had to act smartly and decisively. Miller turned away slightly, perhaps to reach for his shoulder-mounted radio, or simply to survey the curious crowd with a triumphant air. He smugly thought he had the situation under control, that he had subdued this arrogant black bitch driving a luxury car. Little did he know that his moment of inattention and the act of handcuffing him in front had created Eleanor's opportunity. With her hands cuffed in front of her, Eleanor had some wrist movement, though uncomfortable. Taking advantage of Miller's distraction, she quickly and discreetly brought her left wrist, where her smartwatch was, to her mouth. Her thumb pressed the speed dial button that had long been pre-programmed. Chief David Harrison's personal number. A soft, barely audible beep came from the watch. The connection was established. Holding her wrist in the best mic position, Eleanor whispered, her voice urgent but clear enough for the person on the other end to hear over the noise of the street. "David, this is Eleanor Vance." She paused for a second to make sure he recognized her voice. "I'm right on Washington Avenue, a few blocks from the station. Just been arrested by Officer Miller, badge number." She glanced at the name tag on Miller's chest as he turned slightly. "Badge number 714, unjustified handcuffing, requesting emergency assistance." The call lasted only a few seconds. She quickly put her hand down before Miller could realize anything was wrong. She wasn't sure if the signal was strong enough, if Harrison would pick up, if he would believe her. But it was the only thing she could do. She could only hope. In his spacious office on the top floor of the police department building, Chief David Harrison was frowning as he reviewed his packed schedule for the evening when the personal phone on his desk rang with a special tune, the tone he had set for Eleanor Vance. To his surprise, he opened Eleanor Vance's voicemail and listened intently. "David, this is Eleanor Vance." The voice was familiar, but somehow different, urgent, tense, and whispering amid the faint background noise. "I'm right on Washington Avenue, a few blocks from the station. Just got handcuffed for no reason by Officer Miller, badge number 714, requesting immediate assistance." David Harrison froze for a moment. His ears rang. Governor Eleanor Vance, handcuffed by one of his own officers, without cause, on the way to the station? It couldn't be true. But the voice was unmistakable, and the urgency was real. The blood rushed to his face. This was more than a serious incident. This was a disaster. A time bomb that could destroy his career, tarnish the reputation of the entire force, and cause an unprecedented political crisis. Without a moment's hesitation, the initial shock gave way to decisive action. He practically jumped out of his leather chair. He grabbed the walkie-talkie on his desk and turned on the emergency command channel. His voice, commanding and angry, echoed through the quiet office. "All patrol and response units downtown. Code 1033, highest priority. Assemble immediately on Washington Avenue, between 5th and 6th. Situation involving the governor. I repeat, the governor is in danger from our own men. Command team with me. Move, immediately." He threw the walkie-talkie back onto the table, not bothering to put on the jacket hanging on the chair, and stormed out of the office door, shouting orders to his assistant who was standing bewildered outside. His hurried footsteps echoed in the marble hallway as he ran toward the private elevator. He knew he had to get there as soon as possible. Meanwhile, on Washington Avenue, Officer Miller, completely unaware of the approaching storm, was basking in the feeling of power and satisfaction. He turned to look at Eleanor, the beautiful but now subdued black woman, her hands cuffed in front of her, standing silently beside his luxury car. His expression was one of utter smugness. "See?" he muttered, his voice thick with contempt, just enough for Eleanor to hear. "Go ahead and resist. This is what it's all about. Now stand there and wait for the escort. Hopefully your important meeting at the police station isn't too important to cancel." He chuckled, then leaned against the side of his cruiser, crossing his arms over his chest, trying to appear in complete control of the situation, ignoring the curious eyes and phones still pointed at him from afar. He even whistled a cheerful tune. But that melody quickly died out. A sound began to rise in the distance, at first a faint echo, but it quickly grew louder, more urgent and piercing. It was not the lone siren of an ambulance or fire truck. It was a chorus of police sirens, coming from many directions, all at once, heading this way. The sound was urgent and menacing, unlike anything else. Miller frowned, looking around. Had there been a bank robbery recently? Or a shooting? He hadn't received any radio reports. Then he realized with horror. The red and blue lights were flashing madly from both ends of Washington Avenue and from nearby intersections. They weren't passing. They were heading straight for him. Less than 3 minutes after Eleanor's call, an unprecedented scene unfolded before Miller and the onlookers. 5, 6, 7, 8, he lost count. Ford Interceptor patrol cars, shiny black Chevrolet Tahoe SUVs from the command team, and special forces slammed on their brakes, tires screeching on the asphalt. They quickly formed an informal but oppressive perimeter around Miller, Eleanor, and the Lexus. The red and blue lights from dozens of vehicles flashed in unison, turning the entire street corner into a chaotic and tense stage of light. The car doors opened in unison. Dozens of police officers, Miller estimated there were 15 or 20, in full uniform, many in tactical body armor from the rapid response team, quickly climbed out of the car. They moved professionally, spreading out into a semicircle facing Miller, their expressions extremely serious, tense, and somewhat puzzled. Leading the way, almost jogging from the command SUV that had just pulled up behind Miller's patrol car, was a tall, horrifyingly familiar figure. It was Sheriff David Harrison. His face was flushed with anger and haste. His gray hair was disheveled, his white shirt slightly rumpled from not having time to put on a vest. He charged straight toward Miller and the handcuffed woman standing next to him. The whole scene happened so fast, like an action movie, but it was the stark reality. All other sounds seemed to have died down, save for the sirens still screaming and Miller's heart pounding in his chest. He felt a chill run down his spine. A terrible sense of unease, a foreboding feeling invaded his mind. What the hell was going on? Why would the sheriff show up in person with such a large force? David Harrison almost hit Miller as he rushed forward, but his attention was focused on Eleanor. He could hardly believe his eyes when he saw the governor of the state, a woman he respected, standing there in the middle of the crowded street, her hands cuffed with handcuffs from his own police force. His voice broke with rage and shock. "Governor Vance! Dear God!" he cried, his voice filled with undisguised horror. "What happened here?" His eyes swept over the handcuffs on her hands, then stopped at the pale face of Officer Miller standing nearby. "Governor Vance?" The words hit Miller like a sledgehammer in the head. His ears rang. He turned his head to look at the black woman he had insulted, tried to blackmail, and gleefully handcuffed just minutes before. She was still standing there, terrifyingly calm, but her gaze was now cold and authoritative. Then he looked at Sheriff Harrison, who was panting with anger. He looked at the dozen or so other officers standing in a circle, all staring at him, their eyes a mixture of shock, contempt, and an indescribable anger. Governor? This woman was the governor? Governor Eleanor Vance? The head of the state? The sheriff's superior? Impossible. He must have misheard. But the sheriff's horrified expression, the presence of this large force, no, there was no mistaking it. The terrible truth was like a cold stream of ice water through Miller, freezing his every thought, his every pride, his every stupid prejudice. What had he done? He had stopped, insulted, tried to blackmail, and handcuffed the governor of the state? Right on her way to a meeting with the chief of police? His face went white as a sheet, then pale, turning ashen. Cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck and forehead. His whole body began to shake uncontrollably. His sunglasses fell off the bridge of his nose, revealing his blue eyes, now wide, panicked, and incredulous. Eleanor, though still handcuffed, now had the dignity and gaze of a seasoned leader in her posture and eyes. She looked straight at Chief Harrison, her voice cold but clear, loud enough for all the surrounding officers and perhaps even the curious onlookers from afar to hear. "Hello, Sheriff Harrison," she said, her voice even but carrying a weight of its own. "I'm sorry we have to meet under these less formal circumstances. Officer Miller here," she inclined her head toward the trembling officer beside her, "has pulled me over while I was on my way to a scheduled meeting with you at the police department. He gave me no valid reason for the stop. Instead, he used insults based on my race and appearance, asked demeaning questions, and then, deliberately, suggested that I accept a bribe to drop a made-up infraction." She paused for a second, looking Harrison straight in the eye. "When I flatly denied participating in the illegal act and asked him to write me a report if I had indeed committed the crime, Officer Miller charged me with resisting arrest and proceeded to handcuff me." She held her cuffed hands out in front of her slightly, as if indisputable evidence. Harrison's rage exploded. He turned 180 degrees, facing Miller head-on. If looks could kill, Miller would have been reduced to dust on the spot. "Miller!" the sheriff roared, his voice rising above the sirens and the din of the street. People nearby jumped. "Do you know what the fuck you've just done? Who do you think you are?" His voice was hoarse with rage. "You just handcuffed Governor Eleanor Vance, the governor of this fucking state, on her way to meeting with me at the police headquarters." He emphasized each word, pointing directly at Miller, who now looked worse than a man about to be executed. Robert Bob Miller's world came crashing down right there on the dirty sidewalk of Washington Avenue before his superiors, dozens of colleagues, and the public. All his hopes, all his complacency, all his illusions of power vanished in an instant. All he could see was a black abyss opening up beneath him. He stuttered, trying to say something, but only meaningless sounds came out. Gee, Overn, I don't... Then, as if his legs could no longer support him, Miller fell to his knees on the hot afternoon asphalt. His knees hit the pavement with a pitiful thud. His head was bowed to the ground, not daring to look up at anyone. His arrogance was gone, replaced by utter terror and naked cowardice. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" he began to moan, his voice choked with fear. "Governor! Sheriff! Please forgive me! Please forgive me! I'm an idiot! An idiot! I didn't know! I swear I didn't know it was you! I made a terrible mistake! Please! Please! Don't ruin my life! I have a wife and children! Please! Please!" He burst into tears, tears streaming down his red face, mixing with sweat. He clasped his hands in front of his chest, begging pathetically, a stark contrast to the arrogant, smug policeman just minutes before. The sight of a police officer on his knees, crying and begging in the middle of the street, was shocking to all who witnessed it. Sheriff Harrison looked at Miller, who was kneeling on the ground, with a mixture of contempt and anger. He turned to a senior officer, apparently the patrol captain, who was standing closest, and ordered firmly, "Lieutenant Carter, uncuff the governor immediately." Lieutenant Carter, a tall, stern-faced black man, stepped forward. "Yes, sir." He pulled the handcuff key from his belt and carefully unclasped the two metal rings that bound Eleanor's wrists. He did so with a look of remorse and reverence. "Governor, I apologize for this," he whispered as the handcuffs were removed. Eleanor rubbed her wrists, which were still red and swollen. She took a deep breath, regaining her composure and dignity. Chief Harrison stepped forward and bowed deeply to Eleanor, a gesture of respect and sincere remorse. "Governor Vance, on behalf of the entire Metropolitan Police Department, I sincerely and deeply apologize for the horrific and unacceptable incident that occurred. This is an affront not only to you and your office, but also a stain on the honor of all of the dedicated officers who serve each and every day. Officer Miller's actions were intolerable. Then he turned around, his voice cold and authoritative, pointing at Miller, who was still collapsed on the ground. "Get him up. Take his weapon, badge, radio, and take him straight to the station immediately. Take him to a separate holding cell, completely isolated. I want no one to have contact with him until further notice." "Yes, sir." Lieutenant Carter and another officer rushed forward. They pulled Miller to his feet with no effort. Miller was limp, staggering like an empty sack. The shiny badge on his chest was yanked off, and his pistol and other equipment were seized. He was escorted, head down, into the back seat of a nearby patrol car. The car quickly drove away from the chaotic scene, siren blaring. Eleanor watched Miller's car drive away, her eyes complicated, a little sad at the corruption of a man given power, but mostly determined. She turned to Sheriff Harrison, who was still standing there, his face filled with worry and anticipation. "Harrison," she said, her voice calm but determined, no trace of panic or weakness. "This cannot end here. I demand an immediate internal investigation, one that is full, transparent, and impartial. Every detail must be clarified, and the results of the investigation must be made public." She paused, looking Harrison in the eye, emphasizing each word. "This is not just about me, Harrison. This is not about personal vendetta. This is about public trust in law enforcement. This is about the accountability we have been working to establish. This is about making sure that no citizen, regardless of color, status, or circumstance, has to go through what I just went through." Harrison nodded vigorously, his face solemn. "I understand, Governor. I agree completely. The investigation will begin immediately. I will personally oversee it. There will be no cover-ups, no tolerance. Justice will be served." Around them, the police officers began to disperse in an orderly fashion at the behest of their subordinate commanders. The curious crowd gradually dispersed, taking with them the incredible story and the videos they had just captured. Washington Avenue slowly returned to its usual hustle and bustle, but the echoes of the events would surely reverberate for a long time. Justice, in the case of Robert Bob Miller, came as quickly as a storm. The police department's internal investigation, closely supervised by Sheriff Harrison and pressure from the governor's office and the public, proceeded swiftly and without any hindrance. Governor Eleanor Vance's detailed and eloquent testimony was the core of the evidence. It was reinforced by Chief Harrison's own testimony about the distress call and the conditions he witnessed at the scene. More than a dozen officers present also gave consistent testimony about Miller's demeanor and actions before and after the truth was revealed. More importantly, video from Miller's patrol car's dash cam, and especially video from street security cameras and bystander cell phones, captured almost the entire incident, from the moment Miller stopped Eleanor's car to the moment he knelt down to beg. They became irrefutable evidence of his abuse of power, racist rhetoric, and extortion. The very next day, Robert Bob Miller was fired from the police force. His 15-year career ended in disgrace, without fanfare or explanation. He became a symbol of corruption and abuse in law enforcement. The news broke in the media, causing a public outcry across the state and then the country. Headlines read, "Governor wrongfully handcuffed by police in downtown." "Clear evidence of racism and abuse in police force." "Fateful smartwatch call saves governor from rotten cop." Eleanor Vance's story became the center of heated debates on television, radio, and social media about police reform, systemic racism, and the need for increased oversight of those with badges. The district attorney's office quickly moved in. Armed with a thick case file and strong public pressure, they charged Robert Miller with a series of serious crimes: abuse of official power, false imprisonment, attempted extortion, and violating Governor Vance's civil rights under both state and federal law. At his trial a few months later, Miller, now without his uniform or his swagger, looked haggard and a decade older. Faced with irrefutable evidence and testimony from the governor and the chief of police themselves, He and his defense attorney stood little chance. Any attempt to blame it on a misunderstanding or work pressure was dismissed. The jury did not take long to return a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge, in his sentencing, emphasized the seriousness of the abuse of public trust and the dangers of racial bias in law enforcement. Robert Bob Miller was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The sentence was widely considered appropriate, a stark reminder that no one, including the police, is above the law and that power must be held accountable. A few weeks after the trial, Governor Eleanor Vance held a big press conference in the main conference room of the Metropolitan Police Department. She stood at the podium, flanked by Police Chief David Harrison, who looked relieved but still stern. Flashbulbs flashed. Dozens of journalists and reporters from major and minor news agencies were present. Eleanor Vance, in a smart gray suit, looked strong and poised. She wasn't here to gloat over a legal victory. She was here as a leader who turned a painful and humiliating personal experience into a force for systemic change. She began her speech, her voice resonant, clear and full of emotion, transmitted through the microphone to the entire room and over the television waves to millions of people. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, looking directly into the cameras, "not long ago, just a few blocks from where we stand, I fell victim to the very system I was sworn to protect and improve. What happened to me on Washington Avenue that afternoon," she paused, her voice dropping, "is a painful and undeniable reminder that the cancer of racism and abuse of power still persists, even among those entrusted with keeping us safe and providing justice for all of us. It can happen to anyone, anytime, anywhere," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "If your governor, with all his privileges and his status, can be treated like a criminal just because of the color of his skin and the car he drives, imagine what ordinary people, our neighbors, our friends, our children, especially those in minority communities who have no voice, no power, don't have a smartwatch to call the sheriff, what do they face every day?" The room fell silent. Her words touched on the pain and injustice that many had experienced or witnessed. "That experience, as difficult as it was," she continued, "only strengthened my resolve. My resolve to fight injustice relentlessly. My resolve to build a police force that truly serves and protects all citizens in a fair, respectful, and professional manner." Governor Vance, along with Sheriff Harrison, then announced a series of new and more sweeping reforms. Increased use of body cameras for all patrol officers, the creation of an independent civilian oversight board with real power, sweeping reforms to anti-bias, de-escalation, and community engagement training, and a commitment to transparency in data on use of force incidents and citizen complaints. She ended her speech with a call for unity. "Justice has been served for me personally in this case. But the real fight is the fight for a fair and equal society for everyone. This is not my fight alone, or the police department alone, or the government alone. This is our fight. Together we need to rebuild trust, heal wounds, and ensure that a story like mine never happens again to anyone else." As Governor Eleanor Vance stepped down from the podium, applause filled the room. It was not just a celebration of strong leadership, but also a celebration of a message of hope and change. Justice had been served on Washington Avenue, but the journey to creating true justice for all was still a long and challenging one. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.